I had a line in my column on Sunday where I was capturing the mood ahead of the UN summit. And I was picking up that UN staffers were joking about how they might have some kind of stunt to teach Donald Trump a lesson.
And the Washington editor for The Times, Katy Balls, joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, there was quite a lot, wasn't there, in the comments that Donald Trump has made overnight. But I think the most significant, as we wake up here this morning, is his claim that Ukraine can win back all territory now. That seems to be a significant shift in his view.
Definitely, particularly if we go back to the beginning of his second term in the White House. And of course, the infamous Oval Office appearance with Zelensky, where he clashed with Donald Trump and JD Vance. And I think even if you look to the campaign, so Trump's path back to the White House, saying we can get this, this war ended in a day, the implication, even if he didn't spell out specifics for the majority of the time, was really that he was willing to give Putin quite a lot and the Russian side a lot to get this done. And therefore, where we are, to the point we are today, where you have Donald Trump being quite critical of Putin at the United Nations Assembly and spending time with Zelensky, speaking up the prospect of hope. If you think that, this is the same Donald Trump who said you don't have the cards to Zelensky about the Ukraine situation, and he's now saying actually there's a path for Ukrainian victory. It feels like quite a 180 in many ways. Now, of course, we still need to be backed with actions. How you're going to do that, but at least what is very clear right now is Donald Trump is very frustrated with the Russian side, and while he does not believe the Ukrainians are perfect, there's a lot more warmth there in a sense that they're actually trying and they're working with the US.
Yeah, I'm interested in that idea about whether or not there's any practical help here, though, from America, from Donald Trump, because President Zelensky seemed to indicate after the two had met that Donald Trump was ready to give security guarantees to Ukraine, which again is something that he's previously been very hesitant to do.
Yes, though I think ever since the Alaska summit, it's felt as though security guarantees was the thing that the US was willing to move on, if that meant that you could get to a point with Russia. Obviously, since that same summit, we haven't had much. It's felt like a little bit of a stalemate in many ways. There is a sense of I have more meetings. But I think increasingly figures in Washington, D.C. blame the Russians more than the Ukrainians for what it is. There was definitely a little bit of frustration with some European leaders, um, or the sense that perhaps they were giving to Zelensky of holding out for more concessions, and the Americans didn't like that. But I think that ultimately Russia's seen as the trickiest party here. And when it comes to security guarantees, I think there is a sense of what does that look like? We know it's not troops on the grounds. But is it kind of air control? Are the areas there? This seems to be the area where the US is most willing to come forward. But for that to be a real kind of meaty offer, you obviously need to see how it fits into a wider situation. And that stuff is still very much up in the air.
The other thing that struck me was Donald Trump saying that he believed that NATO allies should shoot down any kind of incursions into their territory, essentially engage with Russia. And there were some remarks from President Zelensky which echoed that, but Zelensky also warning that President Putin feels emboldened. He thinks he's testing EU nations and they're not responding. The two men on the same page. What do you think the implications might be of those remarks?
So I think it's an interesting one. Of course, when it comes to what happened in recent days, the Russian plane was intercepted by NATO. However, you compare that to what happened in Turkey a few years ago when you had a Russian plane go over the Syrian border and they shot it down. And I think there is a feeling that, is NATO being muscular enough in its response to Russia testing? And then that reflects on Donald Trump. So you'll speak to figures in the Middle East and so forth, saying Putin keeps pushing and Donald Trump hasn't really done much back yet. And therefore, he is now in this space where he's being more critical of Vladimir Putin, but that hasn't resulted in the sanctions that they're talking about. Is it resulting in action and so forth? So I think that Donald Trump saying that could indicate a further hardening of the US position. When he was pressed and it said, well, would the US be willing to take part in this? It became a little bit more vague. So again, I think we're probably at the point where we can't read too much into what this means for US intervention.
Yeah. Elsewhere at the summit, he gave an incredibly long and rambling speech in which he had some pretty choice words for Sadiq Khan and London.
Yes, and we know that Donald Trump likes to talk about Sadiq Khan, but doesn't like the London mayor, of course. But when it comes to his favourite topics for bashing Britain, the London Labour mayor does seem to come up a lot. He didn't come up on the official state visit, but Donald Trump still managed to talk about him on the plane on the way back. But the comments today, as you say, what was technically every leader's meant to have 15 minutes when they address the assembly. Donald Trump did just under an hour. And he talked about Sadiq Khan, how London had gone wrong, things we'd heard before. And then he added, and they're heading towards Sharia law. Now, this has led to the mayor's office effectively saying they're not even going to dignify that with a response. You've had Wes Streeting coming out and commenting on it. So I think that it makes lots of the members of the UK government that have been just a week ago trying to cozy up in their aim on the state visit uncomfortable that he is now saying this. And it does feel a really far cry from that Chequers press conference where, if we're being honest, Donald Trump just seemed to be on incredibly good behaviour, trying not to upset anyone. So even when there are issues where he clearly disagrees with the UK government, he probably disagreed in the most polite, non-combative way that Donald Trump at least could do. Whereas now it feels as though the gloves are off. And I think with the state visit out the way, um, you're almost seeing in that speech a theme, which it reminded me a little bit of JD Vance's Munich Security Conference speech, where the leaders effectively expected this new vice president in February to turn up and talk about Ukraine and Russia. And instead, he said the real problems in Europe and freedom of speech and so forth. And so much of that very long speech was about Europe, with specific examples about the UK, Germany, and so forth. And therefore, you can't just dismiss it, I think, as Donald Trump having a rant. It clearly is a consistent theme in this administration that they have decided, well, they're not going to lecture some countries in the Middle East, and they say, the days of that are gone. They see the West as different, and they have decided if the UK and other countries in Europe are not doing what they think is the right thing, that starts to be a problem for America in a way I don't think they see it with lots of other countries in the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Finally, Katie, I have to bring this up with you. Donald Trump's team think that somebody sabotaged an escalator when he and the First Lady got on it. The UN has been pretty robust in its rebuttal of that. What's going on here?
Yeah, so there's obviously lots of big geopolitical issues being discussed in Manhattan this week. But what has been very big on the cable news channels, and I think in American media, is Escalatorgate. And Donald Trump did talk about this. So when he started speaking, he had a few complaints about the United Nations, which were practical ones. One being the teleprompter wasn't working, and the second being that the escalator stopped as soon as he and his wife got on it. But he said, luckily, we're very healthy, and luckily he can ad lib, so it was okay. Now, the UN have said that it was always the case the White House was in charge of the teleprompter, so don't blame them on that. And on the escalator, they said it could have been a videographer from Trump's own side. And they said that may be the case. It's all a little bit curious. You see Trump supporters latching on and saying, we think this is trying to embarrass them. I had a line in my column on Sunday where I was capturing the mood ahead of the UN summit. And I was picking up that UN staffers were joking about how they might have some kind of stunt to teach Donald Trump a lesson. And among the ideas going around was the idea of stopping the escalators or the lifts, saying because of cuts you had to walk up it. Now, lots of things are being joined together. In truth, we just do not know. It could have been a videographer. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press spokesperson, is now saying there could be an investigation. But I think what it does show, at least, is there's little love lost between the two sides. The UN obviously feels that Donald Trump is interfering and hurting the organization. And Donald Trump and his administration feel the organization is outdated and needs to change. And I think this has become a flashpoint for airing some of those tensions.
Katie, thank you very much. Great to have you with us.